So this week we will not be meeting for our sacred gathering. We encourage, as we do most years, when the Super Bowl happens, always a big deal on Sundays. But we believe in Wayfarers in hospitality. We encourage people to either throw a Super Bowl party or go attend one if a neighbor or a coworker has one, even if you are not into football, which I'm not sure, but could be unspiritual. We'll look at that another time. Um, it's a gathering of a lot of people. It is a chance to be with people. It's something that's important and fun, a chance for conversation and blessing and celebration. And those are all things that we are about at Wayfarers. And so this week, since we're not getting together, I thought I would do just kind of a short meditation because I was thinking a lot this week about exactly what I just described. The fact that we are willing to cancel a worship service to go and be with people, to make it easier to host and show hospitality, to celebrate and have fun with people. Again, all things that I believe are deeply spiritual, or at least can be, that they don't have to be. And I was thinking about why we do it this way because I was in a conversation this week about kind of the ways we reach out, the ways we like to show God's presence in our life, the ways we share the gospel. And I will confess that this conversation was a bit more of an argument of what it is we do at Wayfarers, what new worshiping communities and other of these kind of small, experimental, agile communities are doing, and why we do this. And so I was thinking back through on why is it um, we do believe in hospitality as an expression of the gospel. Why is it we do things the way we do? And it took me back to kind of some pieces of my own story, and it takes me back to something that I have discovered because of my own story in Jesus' life and in Jesus' teachings as well. And that is, of course, with being with people, of seeking out kind of our normal spaces and being with them. This insight of mine is not one I can say I came up with by studying the scripture and I based my method on it. It was just something I kind of stumbled upon. And that was in the early years when I was first married, when I was just out of college. I was doing two things. I was interning at First Presbyterian Church in Colorado Springs. I was in the youth group. I was tearing around with high school kids, and it was the first time I was having to, I guess, show some sort of responsibility for others, of defending, you know, why I did what I did, and talking to teenagers about Jesus and what I thought kind of his call was on their lives. The other thing I was doing at that time was I was trying to get with a group of friends. We'd been playing music for years, and we were trying to get our band up and running. And so a lot of my days, a lot of my evenings would be working in the youth group, sometimes even doing event, and then we would throw all our equipment in the back of my truck. We'd usually drive up to Denver, often to some just seedy, divey bar, someplace desperate enough to let us, of all people, play there. And what I was struck by again and again in that period of my life, besides the fact I was just really tired, is how I think of it looking back, was I would spend all day thinking strategically and sitting in meetings and wondering, how we can show people that God is relevant to their lives, whether they're teenagers, whether they're people in the community, whether they're people in these churches. And then we would, sweat and scream and often bleed if we, caught a finger or something, playing this music that was supposed to be an expression of who we are, expressing a lot of that energy and that anger and that excitement that we had in that phase in our lives. And some of the best nights were nights when something we did connected with people, and they would come ask and what kind of the inspiration was, what sort of things were important to our lives. And we would say that well, Jesus is. We are people who've been changed and who are following him on this road. And I don't know if it was just the style of music, the fact we were playing, punk music in bars, or just people are very free on a Tuesday night when they have a few drinks in them. And you tell what's important to you. And so we got into just amazing conversation with amazing conversation. Sometimes they were with promoters, sometimes they were with people in other bands, sometimes they were members of the audience, sometimes they're even with people as we're loading our equipment and exhausted and just want to get home because we know we've got, more 9 to 5 hours in the morning. But again and again and again, we were privileged to have these conversations where people shared with us things that were important to them, questions they had, even just blunt disagreements with the way we viewed the world. Questions of, okay, if God is real, why is XYZ, right? We were having just intense, real conversations on a regular basis, felt badly in and over our heads. We prayed with many people. Um, and then sometimes we would go back to these kind of safer church settings, and it just felt like it was lacking the fire at times. We were pondering what it was like to um, invite people into this life of faith, to invite people into those exact same conversations that just seemed so easy and seemed so natural when we were playing shows and when we were at the bars. And I think in that period of my life, I started to kind of ponder, why was it that being outside the walls of the church made it, for me at least, so much easier to have those conversations, for people to be so much more open to that when I was one of them, when I was in their space. And I was struck, I think, in that period of my life by this passage of out of Mark, when Jesus calls his disciple Matthew and then is out partying with him. And for me, I was beginning to notice this pattern more and more in Jesus' life, kind of as I did this. And so I want to read just kind of a quick passage out of Mark chapter 2. This is starting at verse 13. So Jesus went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose, and he followed him. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to him, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." And so, again, just kind of a reminder, you probably know this, but tax collectors um, in Jesus' day were some of the most hated people, and with good reason. They were collaborators. They were people who were doing. They were local people doing the work of this oppressive, vicious empire that had been awful to God's people locally. And not only were they collaborating, doing the work for him, everyone knew that they were frauds. Right? They collected not just what the Romans said, but they collected a little extra off the top. They were robbing you in plain sight. And if you complained about it, you had the Roman soldiers backing them up behind it. So these people are, more or less acting like gangsters. They are collecting money. They are stealing from people through other people's muscle when they are supposed to be local people. You maybe even have grown up with these people. And in disgust, you look at who these people have become. And Jesus, this new rabbi, this new religious guy, is walking around, and he looks at one of these people in the midst of their job, and he says, "Come, follow my ways. Come be an apprentice. Come be a disciple. Change who you've been and who you are." And the next scene we see Jesus at is he's at his house, having a party. He is celebrating, I think, with Matthew, because Matthew, I suspect, is celebrating. He felt probably at this point in his life very trapped. He probably didn't really like who he was. Maybe at some point he saw an opportunity, but I suspect he felt very trapped in that. He knew people would never trust him again. He knew he probably couldn't give back all the money he had taken, right? And yet, despite of who he was, and probably this just kind of regular disgust he had with himself, and definitely the isolation he's feeling from everyone else, Jesus invites him into a totally different way of being. He invites him to be a disciple of this rabbi who's doing amazing work and healing people and talking about God in ways that are different. And you see this celebratory scene, and of course, what does he want to do? He invites all his friends, other filthy sinners, the other people who only manage to tolerate him. And here we see Jesus doing healing in this unusual setting. Of course, in Jesus' day, there were synagogues. There were the good religious people. They probably even did work among people like the tax collectors, saying, "Come to us and we'll teach you how to change. Come, stop being the way you are. Say sorry a whole lunch and maybe we'll tolerate you," right? And Jesus does not have that attitude. He sees the need, he sees the ache and the brokenness. And instead of, telling people to come to him and clean up first, like we so often do as religious people, he goes to them, he goes into their spaces, he celebrates with them, he sees the things that are there. And I think in a way that we're not often comfortable, he doesn't seem, of course, to be telling them that everything's okay. He doesn't just pat them on the head and say, well, I know you didn't mean that well. I think there's many times Jesus explains exactly what sin is. He loves them too much not to do that, but he doesn't expect them to clean up first. He doesn't expect them to change who they are first and foremost. He comes to them rather than waiting for the sinners, whether they're the tax collectors or the dirt poor or revolutionaries, many other people that were considered dangerous or undesirable. He goes to them in their spaces. He celebrates with them this change of life that has happened in Matthew's. And since those days, since that realization of Jesus going out of places of comfort and going to heal, going to make people whole who are sick, often very, very sick in their souls. This is a pattern that I have been privileged to try and follow the Master in. I can just think of so many places I've been privileged to have real conversations, to see lives changed in, in doing murals in public places, in bars, and playing music and at art shows, in my own home when people are over to do all sorts of different things, make dinner together, or play board games. We've done this at creek cleanups. People at times will recognize a person who is there not just to be part of the crowd, not just to do the thing, but who is there praying and who is recognizing that God's presence is there with them. And it's just this amazing experience I've had again and again when we are with people, when we are celebrating, when we are hearing well what is going on in people's hearts and people's lives. We, like Jesus, get to follow them into their spaces. And I've gotten to have these conversations so many times. And I think this is the good news so much of the time, that those things that feel baffling about the world, those things that feel overwhelming, those things that we don't understand, we don't necessarily have to know and understand, because we have been promised that those sicknesses, and right here, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have found many a person who knows a sickness inside, that things are not right in the world. I find that sickness reflected in my own heart. It's not that, I'm some good religious person who gets to go and have answers. Together we mourn the sickness within ourselves, but we don't think that that's all that there is either. I came not to call the righteous. It ain't me. It ain't many of the people I've met, but sinners, to call them and, like a doctor, to heal them, to invite them in another way of being. And so, in this community, I don't see a big deal when people are out and about and feel the need to skip church. I don't feel the need of even calling off worship at times, because we see an opportunity to go be with people, to be God's presence, to discover God's presence among people, celebrating and laughing and enjoying a football game or another sporting event or whatever it is you're into. I just think it's amazing that Jesus left places of comfort, left places that were safe, to strike out into other people's worlds, to celebrate with them, to mourn with them at times, to say, no, the sickness in the world is not the true story. The true story is one of healing and hope, and God is with us. And so it may sound like overly theological reason, but I just invite you to go and be with people. I have tried to follow the Master in this, and I have seen great joy. I've felt great pain in God's presence out and about with people in normal, everyday situations. And my prayer for everybody who hears this is that you too will see God, experience, and to others be God as you are going through your life, as you're doing normal things like celebrating, even things like the Super Bowl.